What happens to the roots of a tree when the garden that bore it is sealed by flame? Not burned, not broken, but hidden. Somewhere beyond the veil of time, beyond the swords of angels and the weeping of prophets, the tree of life still breathes. Not in the open sunlight of this world, no, but in a silence so deep it can only be found in dreams. Its branches once held eternity like fruit. Its leaves once whispered healing across the breath of the earth. But now its roots are buried beneath centuries of exile. Do you remember Eden? Not the stories told by men, not the painted gardens with talking serpents and golden light, but the ache, the ancient homesickness, that strange emptiness we feel even on the most beautiful days, as if the world forgot something and the memory of it still calls. The gate was closed. The flaming sword turned in every direction, but the tree did not die. And so we begin. There is a story buried in the dust of time. A story that begins in the garden but does not end there. A story not of Eden lost, but of life that refused to fade. If you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. Let us sit now in silence. The scroll is opening. The earth was still wet with the memory of birth. Before the footprints of man ever pressed into dust, before wind had names, before sorrow had weight, there was a silence in the world that knew only God. The garden was not merely a place, it was a breath exhaled by the divine. Where the rivers met, not in clash but in sacred song, there stood a tree, not tallest, not proudest, but oldest. And in its stillness it held more memory than the stars. The tree of life did not grow from soil, it grew from command. Be, said the voice that shaped creation, and the tree was. Its roots drank not only water but remembrance. Its branches curved as if in constant prayer. Its fruit, they did not ripen by sun but by permission. To touch them was not simply to eat, it was to awaken. To taste eternity not in years but in knowing. One glimpse of that fruit and the soul would remember what it was before the clay. The garden knew no death, no decay. Even the fallen leaf was not mourned, for it would rise again like a breath returning to the chest. Birds did not pray, wolves did not hunt. Everything was in harmony with the song of its maker. And in the center of it all, not guarded, not feared, not forbidden, stood the tree of life. It was never hidden at first. It was always there like the heart in the chest, unseen yet pulsing in every corner. The first man walked near it often. He did not yet know longing, so he did not yet reach. And the first woman heard its leaves shimmer, but she did not yet ache to understand. The fruit was not forbidden, not like the other tree. No fire circled it, no warning echoed. But the silence around it was sacred, as if heaven itself stood nearby, waiting. It is said that the angels would descend, not to guard it, but to weep beside it. For they, too, remembered the sound of heaven, and this tree hummed with that memory. Some nights when the stars bent low, the tree would shine with a light not of this world. Not harsh, not bright, but soft like love never spoken but deeply known. Even the wind slowed in its presence. Even the rivers circled more gently. Even the soil beneath it seemed softer, as if it too remembered where it came from. And then the whisper came, not to the man, not to the woman, but to the shadow that wandered, still jealous of the light. The whisper came not in defiance but in envy. A serpent without scales, clothed only in ancient pride. It slithered near the other tree, the one with the knowledge too heavy for hearts made of dust. Not the tree of life, no, the other, but it was the tree of life that the serpent feared most. Because to eat from it was to rise, not fall, to be one with the Creator, not apart from Him, to remember, not rebel. And that was a terror to the one who had already fallen. So the serpent spoke of power, and the woman listened, not because she was weak, but because she, like all children of clay, wanted to understand the ache in her ribs. The man ate beside her, and in that moment they saw not the truth but themselves. And suddenly they forgot the sound of the leaves on the tree of life. They forgot the warmth beneath their feet. They forgot the names of the rivers. They forgot the light behind the stars. And the garden held its breath. The angels who once wept beside the tree now stood with drawn flame, not to destroy but to shield, not to punish but to protect. For if man were to eat now from the tree of life, he would live forever in this fallen sorrow, eternally broken, eternally hiding, eternally cut off from the innocence he once held. And so the gate closed, the garden remained, but the path vanished. The tree of life still stood, but no longer in reach. A sword turned in every direction, guarding not the tree, but the hope that one day man would be ready again. And beneath its roots the tree wept, not from rot, but from waiting. Its fruit still glows, but only in dreams, only in the memories of those who still believe there is more to this life than survival. And maybe, just maybe, in the quiet spaces between sleep and waking, its leaves still rustle your name. There are sorrows too ancient for tears, and the greatest of them is this: that man once stood beside the tree of life and walked away. After the garden fell silent and the gates burned shut behind flame and thunder, the earth felt different, not louder, not darker, just heavier, like a soul burdened with something it can no longer name. Adam no longer heard the voice walking in the cool of day. Eve no longer felt the breeze sing across her bones. The wind was still wind, but it no longer carried memory. And yet, somewhere deep beneath the surface of the broken world, the roots of that tree still grew. Because eternity cannot be undone. The soil cried out. The rivers mourned, but the tree waited, not in the garden, not in some distant paradise, but in the thin places where dreams bleed into waking and the soul still remembers. The prophets would later speak of it in riddles, of a tree whose leaves heal the nations, of a center from which the rivers flowed, of fruit that brings back what was lost, but they were only echoes. The tree itself remained hidden, not destroyed, not forgotten, just veiled like the stars in a cloudy sky. Sometimes in the stillness between prayers, one could almost feel its nearness, not in the body but in the soul, a longing so deep it felt like a wound and yet holy. And perhaps that is why God hid it, not in cruelty, but in mercy, for man had now tasted separation. To eat from the tree of life now would not bring joy, it would trap sorrow in eternity. So it was guarded not by walls, but by time, by longing, by repentance, by the slow, aching return to what once was. The angel with the flaming sword did not smile, but he did not weep either. He knew the tree would bloom again, but not until the soil was ready to receive it. And so time began, and the world began to forget. Cities rose, kings reigned, wars painted the ground with ash. People sang of love and conquest. They built towers that pierced the clouds and tombs that whispered eternity in stone. But the tree, it waited. Sometimes it appeared in stories, in dreams, in symbols carved into forgotten temples, always in the background, never in the center, because the center had closed, and in its place humanity searched. They searched for fountains that gave life. They searched for elixirs, for spells, for gardens hidden in the mist. They crossed oceans and deserts chasing what was once given freely, but no man could find it, not because it was far, but because it was close, too close. The tree of life was never meant to be found with the eyes, only with the heart, only with that sacred ache that wakes just before sleep. And those who sought it without pride, those who searched in silence, not ambition, sometimes they heard it, not words, not visions, but rustling. A sound like leaves falling upward. A sound like breath returning to the chest. It sounds like home. One such man was Idris, known to many as Enoch. He walked not away from the world, but through it with eyes that still saw Eden in the wind. It is said the heavens opened to him, not in thunder, but in remembering. And perhaps, just perhaps, he brushed against the tree. Perhaps he knelt beneath it. Perhaps its fruit touched his lips in a dream no man could hold. For Enoch did not die. He was taken not away, but back. Back to the place where time never passed. Back to the garden that I never forgot. Back to the root of the story. And yet he said nothing, because the tree of life cannot be described, only felt, only remembered in the hollow places of the heart. So it remains, not in Eden, but in you, in the longing, in the ache, in the silence between breaths. You have seen it, you have heard it. You just didn't know its name, but now you do. It has been said that the oldest things in creation do not speak in words. They speak in hunger, in silence, in memory, and so the tree of life remains, rooted not in soil but in sorrow and the ancient wound of a world that once knew perfection and let it slip away. When Adam and Eve stepped beyond the burning gate, they did not cry, not at first. Their eyes were new to weeping. Their hearts still remembered heaven too closely, but their bodies began to ache. And that was how they knew something had been lost. It is said that on the first night beyond Eden, Adam dreamed. And in his dream, he walked beneath that tree once more. Its branches stretched over him like a sky. Its fruit pulsed with a golden light that hummed like breath. He reached, not with hands but with soul. He reached and the fruit turned to smoke. When he awoke, the ground beneath him was cold. The stars above him were unfamiliar, and Eve, lying beside him, trembled in her sleep. They would never find the garden again, not with steps, not with maps, not with the desperate tools of men, but still the dream never left them. And when their children came, some righteous, some ruined, they too inherited the ache. Even Cain, walking east with blood on his hands, heard the leaves in his sleep. And he wept not because he was guilty, but because he could no longer remember the sound of peace. And so it passed generation to generation, this longing for the tree. A yearning not for knowledge, not for glory, but for stillness. For that quiet in the soul where death does not reach. Prophets would one day write of it. Poets would name it with metaphors. Sages would chase its image across parchment and night skies. But none would find it as it once was. Not until the world was ready to return. You see, the tree of life was never lost. It was withheld, like a gift too holy to give twice. It did not flee, it waited, not for man to grow stronger but gentler, not wiser but more broken, more open, more empty of pride. Only those who hunger for it without greed will ever feel its shadow again. The ancient texts whisper that in the end of time it shall rise once more. Not in Eden but in the new garden. A garden not born of dust but of return, where rivers run without end and sorrow folds its wings for the last time. And in that place the tree will stand again, it's full of fruit, its leaves glistening with remembrance, and those who eat of it they will not die, not because their bodies are spared but because their hearts have come home. But for now we wander, through cities of smoke, through deserts of noise, through nights that rarely speak of heaven. And yet, if you close your eyes truly and listen, beneath the layers of thought, beneath the murmur of your breath, you may hear something, a soft rustling, a shimmer of leaves not moved by wind but by memory. And if you follow that sound, not with your feet but with your stillness, you may reach it again, not in body but in spirit. The first fruit of eternity still waits. It always has. Long before cities carved their names into stone, before empires rose and buried themselves in dust, there was a river. It did not roar, it did not boast, it sang. And its song was not water but memory. This was no ordinary river. It flowed not just across the land but through time itself, through silence, through Eden. In the garden 4 rivers were born, but only one remembered. It was called by many names, Pishon, Gihon, Hiddekel, Euphrates, but its true name was never spoken, because it was not a word, it was knowing. A sacred current that once kissed the roots of the tree of life, wrapping around it like an eternal vow. I will carry your memory even when they forget. And so when the gates closed and Eden vanished like smoke in the eyes of history, the river did not vanish. It wandered. It flowed through deserts where no rain fell. It wound beneath mountains where no foot had stepped. It passed through ruins not yet built and graves not yet wept over, but it was remembered, and those who followed it. Those weary prophets, those dreaming wanderers, they felt something in its current. Not a voice, not a vision, but a pull, like being called home by something they'd never seen but always known. It is said that Idris, the one lifted to the heavens, would often sit beside a quiet stream that flowed with no source. Its waters were cool even under the sun, and when he closed his eyes he could hear the tree speaking through it, not in speech, but in rhythm, like a breath, like prayer. The river had not forgotten. It still remembered the shimmer of the leaves, the weight of fruit not yet tasted, the light that never burned but only warmed. And for Idris it was enough. He did not seek the garden. He did not demand the tree. He only listened. And in that listening the gates opened not in the world but within him. And perhaps this is the secret, that Eden is not only behind us but buried in the soul, where rivers still flow, where trees still breathe, where silence still sings. The river would go on. It would pass through the hands of Abraham, when he wandered with stars in his eyes and sand in his sandals. It would touch the feet of Musa, when he stood trembling before the fire that did not consume. Even in exile, even in wilderness, the river passed beneath him, carrying echoes of a garden he'd never seen but longed to return. Even the final prophet, peace be upon him, heard its voice on the night of ascension. When he rose beyond the veil, past the stars, past the boundary where angels dare not cross, there, too, the river sang. And its song was familiar, because though Eden W. as close to earth, its echo still echoed in heaven. And that river, that remembering stream, was the bridge between. The people of this world, in their hunger for what was lost, often seek paradise in the sky. But they forget, the river still flows here too. Hidden in sacred springs, in tears shed without witness, in the breath between verses of the Quran, in the hearts that kneel not in ritual but in yearning. There is a reason water is holy, not just because it purifies, but because it remembers, because it once touched the feet of the tree and has never stopped singing since. And perhaps tonight, as you rest with this story blooming in your chest, perhaps you feel it too, a stillness in your blood, a river that flows behind your ribs, a pulse not of flesh but of something deeper, older. And if you listen long enough, you may hear the tree again, not in the garden but in you. Night falls differently beside the river. It does not come with fear. It does not speak of endings. It settles like a cloak of mercy, softly calling all things home. Those who sleep beside it, even in dreams, often wake with tears they cannot explain. Not sorrow, not joy, but remembrance, because the river does not forget. It holds the echoes of Eden beneath its surface, not visible, not loud, but felt in the bones like the warmth of a fire long extinguished. And in times when the world trembled, when faith was cracked and blood painted the sand, it was the river that whispered, "There is still something holy beneath all this ruin." Long after Eden faded from speech and prophets were taken home, there remained among the people certain ones, not kings, not warriors, but quiet souls. We do not know their names, but the river does. They were shepherds who heard silence more clearly than speech, mothers who sang old lullabies with strange rhythms in their voice, blind men who spoke of trees they had never seen, describing the light that fell through its branches as if it lived in their memories. They did not lead armies. They did not perform miracles. They remembered, and in their remembering the river flowed more clearly. Its waters became sweet, its current slower, as if pausing in reverence. These were the forgotten prophets, not messengers, but mirrors. They walked the earth like broken lamps, still glowing faintly from the fire that once lit the world. And wherever they rested, springs opened, palm trees bloomed, and children began to dream again. The river would not speak to the proud, it never thundered, it was never forced. It appeared in the still moments when the prayer had ended but the heart remained bowed, in the hush after tragedy, in the smile between strangers, in the wind that passed between graves. It is said there were tribes who followed it, not knowing what they sought. They moved with the rhythm of its flow, camping where it hummed louder, building sanctuaries where its silence deepened. They did not write books. They etched spirals into stone. They painted trees with no leaves, only glowing orbs where the fruit should be. Archaeologists now call them primitive, but perhaps they were the closest of all, because the river never wanted to be understood, only remembered. And the tree, it smiled in the dreams of these people, not as a judge, not as a reward, but as an old friend waiting on a far hill. When they passed into death, they did not fear. They believed the river would carry them home, and who can say it did? Because even now, when one stands beside ancient waters in valleys untouched by machine or war, the air becomes thick, not heavy, but full. And the trees seem to bend slightly as if bowing to a presence unseen. That is when the river is closest. That is when Eden stirs. And when your heart is quiet enough, when your breath matches the slow rhythm of creation, you may hear it say, "I remember." And in that remembering, you are not alone. The ancients believed that memory itself is water. They spoke of dreams as rivers winding through the soul, feeding the roots of forgotten trees. And if that is true, then each of us carries Eden inside, not as a place, but as a longing, a trembling echo from a life our bodies never lived, but our spirits still mourn. The river still runs, though now it often hides. Beneath cities choked with smoke, beneath temples turned to dust, beneath footsteps that no longer pause to listen. But every now and then it rises, in the voice of a child asking where they came from, in the tear of an old man who cannot remember his name, but I still remember the smell of rain on warm stones, in the way your chest aches when you see a tree lit by dawn, and you don't know why, but something in you calls it home. This is not a coincidence. This is remembrance, because the river never forgets, even when we do. It passes through the ruins of empires that mocked the heavens. It seeps beneath the bones of those who thought themselves gods. It runs along the edges of forgot. 10 graves carrying whispers to the one who remembers every name. There is a story told in the night deserts of an old woman, a shepherdess who had never read a book, who never prayed with words but knew when to kneel. She would follow the water with her flock, not by maps but by instinct. And when others questioned her path, she'd simply say, "The water remembers, I just listen." They say she never lost a sheep, and when she died, the spring she drank from never dried. It still runs, even now, though no one dares claim it, because some waters are not meant to be owned, only reverence. It is the same with the tree. You cannot seek it like gold. You cannot hold it like treasure. You can only wait and remember. There are those who claim they have found Eden buried beneath this ruin or that temple, or mapped beneath a mountain range. But they search with their eyes, not with silence, not with surrender, because Eden is not lost on the earth. It is lost in the heart. And until the heart returns, the river will continue to wander, carrying the memory of a tree that once gave life, and a people who once touched eternity and then forgot. But the river is patient, more patient than we know. It waits beneath every prayer. It listens beneath every silence. It flows behind your ribs, waiting for the moment your soul remembers what your mind cannot name. And on that night, perhaps even this one, when you lie awake between sleep and waking, and a quiet tear rises without reason, and you feel as though something is calling you from far, far away, perhaps it is the river. And perhaps it is time to answer, not by searching, not by striving, but by remembering. The tree still waits, the river still sings, and somewhere in the dark the garden still breathes. There is a sound older than thunder, quieter than the fall of a feather. It is the sound of a tree. Remembering, not just wind in its branches, not the rustle of leaves or the creak of wood, but something deeper, a voice that doesn't speak in words but in the soul. The tree of life had such a voice. It was not heard by ears, it was heard in stillness, in that hollow part of the chest that aches when beauty is too much to bear. The first to hear it were not the prophets, not the angels, but the soil. The very earth where it was planted shivered when the tree awoke. Because its roots did not pierce only through dirt, they moved through time, through memory, through the breath of heaven. When the divine said, "Be," and the garden unfolded like light from shadow, the tree of life opened its eyes, and the first sound it made was a sigh, a soft exhale into a world not yet broken, a sigh that carried the breath of paradise itself. That voice, it never faded. Even when Eden closed, even when swords turned and hearts turned colder still. Even when centuries passed and the world built its towers and man forgot his beginning, the tree still whispered. Not in gardens, not in temples, but in longing. The voice beneath the leaves was not a command. It was not "come back." It was not "repent." It was simply "I remember you." And those who heard it, their lives changed. not with lightning, not with visions, but with a strange peace, the kind that makes one weep for no reason, the kind that slows the breath and bends the knees. Some heard it in dreams, some are ill, some in the final moments of life as if the tree leaned close at the very end, to remind them of the beginning. One story tells of a boy who wandered into a cedar grove and fell asleep beneath the tallest branch. He did not dream of gold or angels. He dreamt of silence, deep, gentle, knowing. And when he woke, he said only one thing to his mother: "The tree spoke to me." And never again did he lie, not because of fear, but because something true had touched him and falsehood could no longer find a home in his voice. The old texts, buried in dust and prayer, hint that when Musa heard the voice from the burning bush, it was not the first time fire had spoken. The fire that did not consume, perhaps it was not a fire at all. Perhaps it was the tree's echo, calling to the root that had once brushed its flame. And when the prophet rose into the heavens and passed through realms the soul cannot imagine, he was met by voices, some vast, some small. But the one that stilled his heart, the one that spoke to his core, may not have been words at all. It may have been leaves, rustling with the sound of ancient breath, calling not with command but with remembrance. Because what the tree of life offers is not knowledge, not even power, but home. And home does not shout, it waits, it whispers, it sings through silence. Even now, this very night, if you close your eyes and listen, truly listen, you may hear it. Not outside, but inside. The hush beneath your fear, the pause between your heartbeat, the sigh you give when you finally let go. That is the voice beneath the leaves. It calls not to your mind, not to why, our strength, but to that part of you that still remembers walking in the garden barefoot with no name and no shame. The voice says only this: you were never forgotten. There are some who believe the tree still speaks, not in forests, not in visions, but in sorrow. Because sorrow remembers Eden. It is the ache of what was and what still breathes just beyond the veil. They say the saints, the Aulia, those quiet ones who prayed not with tongues but with hearts, heard the tree in their solitude. They wandered the earth like forgotten stars, glowing faintly in the dark. And when they sat in stillness, the leaves stirred, not physically, but inside them, like something sacred had moved within their chest. A shiver that was not fear, but the presence of the divine remembering itself in them. They did not tell stories, they became them. One of them, a traveler who lived between cities, never staying more than a week, was once asked why he never settled. He smiled and said, "I go where the leaves call me." And that was all. People whispered he was mad, but children followed him like birds. Strangers wept near him without knowing why. And at his grave the olive trees bowed without wind. There was another, a woman who never spoke. Her silence was not empty. It was full of rustling. She would sit beside the well for hours, eyes closed, hands open, as if waiting for something to fall into them. But nothing ever did. Until one day she disappeared, gone without footprints. Only a single green leaf remained on the stone where she had sat, and it had no trees. The voice beneath the leaves does not come when called. It comes when you forget to speak. It comes in surrender, when you stop seeking answers and begin asking with your being. It comes in the dark, in moments too quiet for certainty. It may come while you're folding clothes or weeping on the floor or walking home alone under a moon that feels impossibly far. And when it comes, you do not hear words. You feel memory. The scent of soil after rain, the sensation of light without source. The heartbeat of the world slowing as if the tree has leaned close and pressed its forehead against your own. The Quran speaks of trees not just as signs but as witnesses. Every leaf that falls, it says, God knows it. Every seed split in the dark he sees. And perhaps the tree of life was the first witness. Before angels recorded, before tablets were written, the tree stood. It showed innocence. It saw the fall. It saw the turning away, and it has not stopped watching, not to judge, but to weep. Because what the tree mourns most is not that we left, but we forgot how to get home. It does not want perfection, it never did. Even in Eden, the tree was surrounded by silence, because holiness is quiet. And those who touched its fruit, not with fingers but with soul, did not become proud. They became small, small like stars, small like atoms, small enough to be held by God. And maybe that's the secret. That the voice beneath the leaves isn't calling us to climb. It's calling us to kneel, to become still, to become soft, to become soil again, because only the soil remembers how to hold the roots, and in that remembering the tree breathes. There is a moment just before dawn when the world holds its breath. The stars, still watching, begin to dim. The wind hushes as if it too is waiting. And in that silence, deeper than sleep, older than time, the tree speaks. Not aloud, not to the ears, but to the soul that has grown tired of noise. The voice beneath the leaves is not a sound. It is a memory, a return. And it is not just calling you back to Eden, it is calling you back to yourself. You see, the tree does not exist to give answers. It exists to restore what was lost, to unmake the ache, to hold for a moment the parts of you that forgot they were once whole. There was a man, unknown by name, who traveled deep into the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. He carried no map, only a verse. It was said he sat alone among the dunes for 7 days, saying nothing, eating nothing, drinking only from a pouch of rain he had gathered with his hands. On the 7th night a breeze came, not from the north nor the east, but from somewhere deeper, and with it came a sound, like paper folding, like silk tearing underwater, like leaves falling not to the ground but into light. When he returned, he spoke only once, to a child asking why his eyes looked so distant. And he said, "I heard the tree dreaming." No one believed him, but no one could meet his gaze for long, because those who have heard the tree carry its silence like a second skin, not heavy but holy. The voice beneath the leaves is not only for the holy. It is not reserved for saints or prophets. It speaks to those who are broken enough to listen, those whose hearts have cracked open from grief too deep to name, those who have prayed not with words but with tears that would not fall, those who age. Ave sat in the dark long enough to become friends with it. The tree loves these ones most, because only cracked vessels can hold the kind of light that does not burn but heals. It is why the voice comes gently, never when you are looking for it, only when you are finally still enough to hear. It does not call you by your failures. It does not remind you of your shame. It does not whisper demands. It says only this: "You are still mine." And in that sentence all the centuries fall away. Swords at Eden's gate fall silent. The fire softens, and for a breathless instant you are there again, barefoot, unashamed, home. This is not fiction. It is not a myth. It is a memory, a sacred memory planted in your soul before your body was born, a truth older than breath. And now, as you lie beneath the sky of this night, whether in a city or a cell, a palace or a prison, that voice may still find you, because the tree is not waiting to be discovered. It is waiting to be remembered. Close your eyes. Let the noise fall away. And if your soul stills enough to become soil again, you may hear it. Not a sound, not a word, just the whisper of a leaf falling into your chest. And if you weep, let it be, because even the tears remember Eden. Not all things that are offered are taken, and not all gifts are given to be consumed. Some are meant only to be seen, to remind the soul that not every hunger must be filled. The tree of life bore fruit, golden, glowing, not with light but with the stillness of eternity. Each fruit shimmered like a memory that had not yet been born, and they pulsed with something ancient, as if each one held a heartbeat not of flesh but of meaning. And yet the fruit was never touched, not by Adam, not by Eve, not in the days of light when the garden hummed with the breath of the Most High. Why? Because they did not yet ache. They did not yet crave eternity. They were already whole. To taste that fruit in wholeness would have been sweet, but to taste it in brokenness would be a curse that never ends. And so it remained untouched, shining, waiting. The serpent did not tempt with that tree. He could not. He dared not. The tree of life was too holy, too near to the throne. To reach for it would have been like reaching for God's face, not in love but in rebellion. Instead, he turned their eyes to the other tree, the one of knowledge, of duality, of you shall be as gods. And the fruit of that tree, it shimmered too, but not with eternity, with desire to know, to control, to step out of dependence and into the shadow of self. And when they ate, their eyes opened, but not in the way they dreamed. The tree of life, once just a breath away, now stood behind the flame, not because God was angry, but because mercy would not allow eternity to be married to pain. And so the fruit of life was never tasted, not then, not fully, not yet. But oh, its scent lingered. Even as they stepped into exile, Adam still smelled it in the soil. Eve still heard its silence in her womb. And every child they bore carried the hunger they never named, the ache for the fruit that never touched their lips. Generations passed. Kings ruled and fell. Temples rose and burned. But the memory of that fruit remained. It appeared in the corners of myths, apples of gold in forgotten gardens, crimson figs in distant lands, grapes that gave youth, wines that never intoxicated, pomegranates that bloomed in deserts no map could find. Each story was a shadow, each legend a longing, each fruit a symbol of what was left behind, and what waits still. But here is the secret. The fruit of the tree of life does not spoil, it does not rot, it does not wait with impatience. It knows, it has always been known. It was never about the taste, it was always about the readiness. Only when the soul becomes empty of itself can it carry the fullness of that fruit. Only when the heart becomes soil again can it cradle the seed of what was lost. And in that day, whenever it comes, the fruit will fall gently as if it had always belonged in your hand. But until then, it glows in silence, not to torment, but to remind myself that something holy still waits for you, not in temples, not in heavens, but in the ache you carry quietly. That ache is the garden remembering you. Some things are too holy to be held with hands. The fruit of the tree of life was such a thing. It was not sweet the way honey is sweet. It was sweet the way peace is, the way a soul feels when it has nothing left to prove, nothing left to fear, nothing left to chase. That is why the fruit was never tasted, not because it was forbidden, but because it was sacred. And sacred things must be received, not taken. But man forgot this. After Eden closed, they began to hunger not for wholeness, but for power. They chased fruit in every form, crowns made of gold, scrolls filled with secrets, potions, and promises written in starlight and shadow. Some climbed mountains seeking gods, others dug beneath ruins for elixirs. A few whispered to the winds, asking it to lead them back to the garden. And though the answers never came, the hunger remained. Not because they were wrong to seek, but because they forgot to listen. The fruit that was never tasted lives in silence. It grows only in stillness. It opens only to hearts that no longer grasp but kneel. The Quran tells us of a tree in paradise, whose shade stretches beyond imagination, whose nearness causes angels to tremble. Some say it is the same tree. Some say it is its mirror, what the tree of life became when it returned to the unseen. But perhaps it was never gone. Perhaps it simply shifted out of reach into remembrance. And perhaps its fruit still ripens, not on branches, but in hearts that ache for what cannot be named. Have you ever sat in silence and felt something rise in you, a weeping that did not belong to grief, a joy that arrived without reason? That may have been the tree, brushing against your spirit, letting you know, I am still here. It is said the prophet led Rfdfa in his night journey past the Lot tree of the utmost boundary, a tree beyond which none may pass, a tree where even angels turn back, a tree that stood at the end of creation and the beginning of return. There beneath its leaves, beyond time, beyond form, he stood. And though we are not told all that was seen, those who carry light in their hearts whisper quietly, the fruit was there, not to be eaten, but to be remembered, because the taste of that fruit would not fill the belly, it would awaken the soul, it would restore every broken name, it would return us to the moment before the first forgetting. And the world was not ready, but the tree waits. There are those who say the fruit has begun to glow brighter, that the gates will open again, that the swords will lower, that the voice will call, but it will not call to kings, nor to scholars, nor to those who claim they are chosen. It will call to the lost, the weary, the wanderers who have stopped asking why and started whispering when. When will we be home? When will the ache end? When will the fruit fall, not to be taken but to be received? And the answer, soft as breath on glass, is this: when you no longer need it to prove anything. Because the fruit of life was never about immortality, it was about belonging. And only those who are content to be dust again can carry eternity in their hands. Night after night the world turns, and yet the fruit does not fall. It waits suspended in stillness, held not by branch but by will. There are many kinds of hunger. The hunger of the body, loud, desperate, immediate. The hunger of the mind, restless, searching, insatiable. And then the hunger of the soul. It is this last hunger that the fruit was made for. A hunger that cannot be fed by words or wealth or praise. A hunger that appears in quiet moments, just after prayer, just before sleep, when all else has gone silent and something deeper begins to stir. It is then and only then that the memory returns. The tree, the garden, the breath of the eternal hovering above the heart like unseen dew. But you must be willing to feel it. You must be willing to ache. Because the fruit that was never tasted cannot be chewed. It must be wept into, and the weeping must be sacred, not because it is pure, but because it is honest. There was once a man who wandered the plains alone, carrying a single question in his chest. Why did we lose it? He did not seek paradise. He did not seek visions. He only wanted to understand the forgetting. He walked until his sandals tore, until his voice cracked, until his body gave in beneath a fig tree that bore no fruit. And as he laid beneath its shadow, a dream took him. In the dream, he stood at the edge of a golden garden where the air was warm with forgiveness, and there, upon a single branch, the fruit glowed. He reached for it, trembling, but his hand did not lift. He fell to his knees, not out of despair, but out of reverence. He bowed his head and whispered only this: "I am not yet empty." When he woke, he was still beneath the fig tree. But something had changed. The hunger had quieted, not vanished, but softened, sanctified. He rose and walked again, not to seek, but to serve. And wherever he went, people said they smelled pomegranates blooming even where no tree had grown. Perhaps the fruit had touched him after all, not to fill him, but to change him. And this is the mystery. The fruit of the tree of life was never meant to be consumed in exile. It was meant to call you home. To draw your soul not toward possession, but toward purification. To make your longing holy. Even now, as you lie beneath the stars, as your breath slows, as your body becomes soft against the cradle of sleep, perhaps the tree is near. Not to tempt, not to test, but to sing. To sing of a moment not yet come, when the gates will open, not with trumpets, but with tears, when the soul will no longer reach upward with greed, but downward with humility, when the fruit will fall not into the hand, but into the heart, and it will taste not of sugar, not of wine, but of remembrance, the remembrance of what we were before the ache, before the exile, before the dust forgot the breath within it. And then the garden will rise again, not in a place, but in a people whose hunger has been turned to praise. A people who no longer ask, "Where is Eden?" but whisper, "Let Eden be found in me." The fruit that was never tasted was not a loss, it was a promise, and its promise is still ripening. There is a belief, whispered only in the hearts of the faithful dreamers, that Eden never truly died. It sleeps. Not in ruins, not in soil, but in the folds between time and mercy. It has not withered. It has not faded. It has only gone quiet, like a beloved who waits in stillness, knowing one day you will return. The garden that once knew no death, no sorrow, no shame, I still breathe. Its breath is slower now, deeper, like the breath of one who weeps in their sleep. Because yes, the garden dreams. And in its dreams, we still walk with bare feet across grass that hums with remembrance. We still hear the sound of our own names, not spoken by mouths, but by light. We still laugh without reason, for there is nothing to fear, nothing to hide, nothing to lose. In its dreaming, Eden still holds the footprints of the first. Adam, who walked there with no past. Eve, who danced beneath the stars before there were days to count. And though they fell, the garden never cast them out in hate. It mourned. It watched them go as a mother watches a child disappear beyond the hills, not with anger, but with aching hope. Even now it waits. Its trees do not bear fruit, its rivers do not flow, its birds do not sing, but they do not die, they sleep. And when the veil lifts, when the gates open with the weight of forgiveness, they will rise again, because the garden remembers every leaf that ever shimmered, every prayer ever whispered near its flowers, every promise made by heaven beneath its boughs. It remembers the sound of Adam's first breath. It remembers the joy in Eve's first cry. It remembers the voice, the one that spoke it into being with a word not made of letters but of love. And it remembers you. Yes, you. Though you've never seen it, though your feet have only known dust and concrete, though your eyes have only wept over broken things, the garden knows your name. Because somewhere buried deep within your chest is a piece of it, a seed, planted when your soul was formed, watered by dreams, hidden beneath years of noise and fear and forgetting. And some nights like this, it stirs. You feel it when you cry without knowing why. You feel it when you look at a child sleeping and the ache in your heart is both joy and sorrow. You feel it when you pray not for answers but just to be held. That is Eden dreaming inside you. And maybe, just maybe, you've dreamed of it too. A place you've never been but miss, with a grief that feels older than your bones. A voice you've never heard but recognize it as your own. A light that does not shine on you but through you. These are not dreams, they are memories, because the soul does not forget its first home, even when the mind does. And the garden, even in its dreaming, calls to you. It does not call with thunder. It does not call with command. It calls with stillness, with the hush before dawn, with the moment your heart slows just enough to hear the space between your breaths. That is where Eden lives now, in the in-between, waiting not to be found but to be remembered. And when enough hearts awaken, not through might but through surrender, the garden will rise. Not in the clouds, not in the stars, but here, in every kindness, in every prayer whispered behind closed doors, in every soul that turns away from power and bends toward mercy. Because Eden is not a reward, it is a return, and the gate is not guarded by fire, it is guarded by pride. The garden was not made to be forgotten. It was made to be returned to, but not with maps, not with swords. With softness. The prophet Letter FDFA once said, "Between my house and my pulpit is a garden from the gardens of paradise, a space of earth, yet somehow more." Perhaps he meant that the garden is not gone, just hidden in plain sight. Where the prayer is real, where the hearts are humbled, where the silence is full, there Eden breathes again. Because the garden is not just a place, it is a presence. It does not need perfect trees, it needs truthful hearts. Those who know how to kneel without being seen. Those who ask nothing but to remember. Those who cry for what they cannot name and find healing in the crying itself. That is where the garden blooms, not in soil, but in surrender. It is said that in the time before time, when the heavens were still young, Eden was planted in. Not on earth, but beneath the throne. And from there it was lowered like mercy taking shape. The angels wept when they saw it, not for sorrow, but for beauty too deep to bear. And when Adam was formed, his soul was shown the garden before it ever knew the clay. So when he entered it later, it was not new, it was home. This is why the exile hurt so much. Not because of punishment, but because of dissonance. His soul still heard the song, but his body had fallen out of tune. And since that day, every child born of Adam carries that ache. A longing for harmony, for the music that cannot be heard with ears but with the marrow of the bones. We try to recreate it, with love, with beauty, with worship. Sometimes we come close. Sometimes the veil thins just for a moment. A recitation that pierces through the noise. A hand held in silence. A single breath taken beneath a tree that somehow feels familiar. These are not accidents. These are visitations. Moments where Eden draws near, not to reward, but to remind myself that you are still connected, that the garden still dreams of you as you dream of it. One story is told of a man who lived in a ruined city where gardens were forbidden and no tree had grown for 100 years. Each day he would walk to the cracked stone wall at the edge of the city and sit in silence. He never spoke. He never begged. He only waited. When asked what he was doing, he would answer, "I am giving the garden a place to return to." And one spring after his death, a vine broke through the wall. No one planted it. No one watered it, but it grew. And beneath its shade the children laughed again. Perhaps that was the garden waking up. Not in full, not yet, but stirring. Because when enough hearts remember, when enough souls grow quiet, when enough voices sing not for the world but for the one behind it, the garden will open its eyes. And it will not look like a paradise of gold. It will look like a prayer fulfilled. A single leaf falling into a palm that had waited without bitterness. A river beginning to flow again, not from mountains but from mercy. The tree of life stretching its arms not into the sky but into the hearts that had prepared room. Because Eden was never locked. It was only waiting. Eden was never destroyed. It was folded. Folded like a cloak around the breath of God, tucked into a place that cannot be charted by compass or footstep. It exists, but not in space. In yearning, every true yearning is a door to it. Not every hunger, but the ones that arrive without reason in the middle of the night, in the silence after prayer, in the sound of your own heartbeat when you remember that you were made for more. Those are the seeds, and Eden is the soil. The garden does not wait with impatience. It waits with certainty. Because it knows, one day we will remember how to return. Not as conquerors, not as pilgrims, but as children, quiet, trembling, barefoot again. When the last veil is lifted and the soul stands before its maker unclothed by ego, the garden will rise again, not from the dust but from within. Its trees will not bloom from ground but from breath. Its rivers will flow from the chest of the faithful. Its sky will be the canopy of remembrance, because Eden is not behind us, it is ahead. And inside, there is a night known to the heavens, a night where the veil thins so delicately even the stars hold their breath. On that night the garden whispers. It calls not with words but with scent, the scent of jasmine and myrrh, of wet leaves and clean soil, of prayers never spoken but always heard. And those who wake with tears on such a night without knowing why, they have walked its edge. They have brushed against its gates, and perhaps they have seen it not with eyes but with mercy. Eden does not bloom in pride. It blossoms in those who have broken beautifully, who have lost everything and still offer thanks, who have knelt not in victory but in longing, who have loved the unseen more than the world that boasts. It is in these hearts that the garden prepares its return, one leaf at a time, one act of silence, one breath of sincerity. And when enough hearts have been made into gardens, soft, clean, unguarded, the garden itself will no longer need to sleep. It will open like dawn, not all at once, but slowly, gently, without spectacle, because Eden does not need to be seen, it only needs to be known, and the soul that remembers it will carry it into every place they go. They will become trees in the desert, shade in the heat of cruelty, roots in the loosened earth of despair, and they will not need to speak, because the garden speaks through them. They will not need to prove, because Eden proves itself in peace. And in the final moment, when the veil between breaths stretches thin, when the last fear has melted into submission, the soul will find itself not arriving but returning. It will step into the garden barefoot as it once was, and the tree ease will bow, and the rivers will rise to greet it, and the fruit will fall softly, not to be taken but to be received. And the garden will whisper its first word again, not in warning, not in farewell, but I welcome it, because it never stopped dreaming of you. It was not a sword of punishment, it was a sword of mercy. When Adam and Eve stepped through the veil of light and into the heaviness of earth, the gate behind them did not slam shut in anger, it wept. And from that sorrow a sword was born, flaming, turning, guarding, not to threaten but to protect, not to keep man out of Eden but to keep eternity from becoming corrupted by sorrow. Because if they had reached again for the tree of life, now clothed in mortality, now pierced with shame, they would have sealed themselves into brokenness forever. And so the gate was sealed, the sword was placed, and time began to pass. But the sword I did not sleep. It turned in every direction, a circle of holy fire, a wheel of remembrance, a boundary drawn not in vengeance but in love. No hand could pass it. No word could soothe it. Only purity could cross. Only the soul returned to stillness. It stood there for centuries, unchanging, waiting. And yet I was not alone. Some say the angels took turns standing beside it, not to wield it but to weep. They mourned not only the exile but the ache, the hunger that had now entered creation, the distance between what was and what might have been. And the sword felt it too. Though it had no voice, its fire spoke. It spoke of love not yet fulfilled, of home not yet rebuilt, of the pain of guarding what once was freely given. It is said that some prophets in their deepest prayers saw flashes of that sword, not in anger but in awe, because to see it was to remember that holiness does not flee sin. It shields itself until the soul is ready to be made whole. The sword did not curse man, it saved him. By standing at the gate, it gave humanity time to return the long way through struggle, through seeking, through surrender. Way of the dust becoming light again. There were whispers, ancient and half-forgotten, of mystics who claimed to hear the sword. They said it hummed in the night not with violence but with sorrow, a morning song, a lullaby for the garden. It sang not of wrath but of waiting, and those who heard it were changed. They walked more softly, spoke more gently, bore grief like a crown, not because they were holy, but because they remembered. They remembered that there is a fire which burns not to destroy but to purify. A fire that dances, turning in every direction, searching for the soul that no longer fears being seen. And to such a soul, the sword softens, it lowers, it lets them pass. Not into Eden, but into themselves, because the gate was never made of iron, it was always the heart. And the sword that guards it does not burn flesh, it burns falsehood. Pride cannot pass it, greed cannot pass it. Arrogance turns to ash before it even reaches the flame. But humility, humility walks untouched. For the sword does not fear the lowly, it honors them. It turned slowly, this sword, not with fury but with rhythm, like a star that spins, like time itself. Its fire did not roar, it whispered, not do not enter, but are you ready? Because the gate to Eden is not a door, it is a mirror. And the sword that guards it does not repel flesh, it reveals the soul. And the soul, when it sees itself clearly, must choose, return in truth or turn away again in fear. Long ago there lived a man known only by his silence. He was not a prophet, not a scholar, not even a traveler. He lived on the edge of the wilderness where the wind was older than language. Every morning he would stand with his back to the sunrise and wait. When asked why, he simply said, "The gate opens when the light is behind me." No one understood, but on the day he died, a boy wandered to the place where he used to stand. And there in the sand he found a single line scorched into the earth, a perfect circle glowing faintly. No fire, no heat, just light. And within that circle he felt no fear, only peace. Some say the sword had opened, if only for a breath, because sometimes the fire makes room for the ones who wait in stillness. The Quran speaks of the fire that spoke to Musa, Arabic tain, Arabic lam, Arabic yet, Arabic ha, Arabic alif, Arabic lam, Arabic seen, Arabic lam, Arabic alif, Arabic meme. A fire that did not burn the tree, a fire that was called by name. What if the sword is the same fire? Not a weapon but a presence, a boundary of awe. The fire that guards the gate is not cruel. It is ancient. It is the line between ego and surrender. Those who step toward it carrying themselves, their pride, their wounds, their claims of righteousness, they are turned away. But those who come with nothing, those who come with hands open, hearts trembling, souls emptied of all but hope to them, the sword does not burn, it bows. Because to pass the fire is not to earn Eden, it is to remember it, and remembrance cannot be force. It must bloom, one leaf at a time, one silence after another, until the soul becomes light enough to enter. There are moments precious, rare, when the veil lifts for just a breath, when the soul forgets the world and remembers the garden. In such moments the sword turns slower, its flame dims, not in weakness, but I welcome it, and the soul walks through, not to take, not to grasp, but to kneel. Because this gate, this sword, this garden, none of them were built to be conquered. They were meant to be returned to, and the only key is surrender. The fire never forgot. Long after the footsteps faded, long after the dust of exile settled, long after the stars grew weary of watching men forget the garden, the sword still turned. And every rotation was a prayer, not from man to God, but from creation back to the Creator. Let them find their way home. The sword had no heart, and yet it knew grief. It had no eyes, and yet it recognized purity when it came near. It had no voice, but it hummed with mercy. Yes, mercy, because the sword was not destroyed, it was refined. Every time a soul drew near and turned away again, not ready, not clean, not true, the sword did not rejoice. It wept, for it knew what waited beyond, not reward, not luxury, but peace. And peace must not be disturbed by impurity. Even one drop of pride can poison a river of light. So the fire turned, and turned, and turned, until one day a man came, not tall, not strong. His clothes were torn, his eyes were empty of self. He walked not with the steps of a seeker, but of one who had nothing left to lose. He did not speak, he did not kneel, he simply stood and opened his hands, and the fire paused. The sword that had turned since the exile for the first time stood still, and in that stillness there was no sound, not wind, not birds, not even breath, just silence. And then the flame softened, not disappeared, not quenched, but it changed. It became clear, gentle, almost cool, and the man stepped forward. No lightning struck, no angels sang, but the trees beyond the gate sighed, as if welcoming one who had been gone too long. He did not enter Eden, not yet, but he had passed the sword, and in doing so he proved what the fire had always known, that the path back to the garden was not found by the strong. It was opened by the broken, and the sword, it began to turn again, slower now, softer, like a dance nearing its end. Because each soul that passes through, each soul that kneels before the flame, not in fear but in truth, brings Eden closer. The Quran tells us of the gatekeepers of paradise, of the angels who stand in light, welcoming those who arrive with clean hearts. And perhaps the sword is one of them, not cast in flesh but on fire, a flame given form so that only the honest may return. And if that is true, then every time you purify your heart, every time you let go of one more veil of arrogance, one more shadow of anger, one more thorn of despair, the sword turns slower. The fire dims, and Eden opens not there, but here, in the breath, in the prayer, in the still moment between doubt and faith. Because the sword is not there to stop you. It is there to prepare you. So tonight, if your heart feels heavy, if your soul feels weary, if your hands tremble with longing you cannot name, do not fear the fire. Stand before it, not in defiance, not in shame, just in truth. Let it see you. Let it burn away what no longer belongs. Let it guard you as you return, not to Eden, but to yourself. Before there was shame, before there was exile, before the gate closed and the garden fell into a dream, there were names, not names like ours, not titles carved into stone or spoken to be remembered. These were names given by light, formed of meaning, wrapped in breath. The first thing Adam, Arabic tain, Arabic lam, Arabic yet, Arabic ha, Arabic caliph, Arabic lam, Arabic scene, Arabic lam, Arabic caliph, Arabic meme was taught was not how to build, or to pray, or to speak in tongues. He was taught names. Wa alama adama alisma kalaha. And he taught Adam the names, all of them. What names? The names of all things. The names of the rivers before they wept. The names of the trees before they withered. The names of the stars before they scattered. The names of you. Yes, you, not your earthly name, but your real name. The one that was written before you were formed in the womb. The name the soul was shown when it stood before its Lord and said, "Yes, I testify." That name still exists, not in sound, not in ink, but in the deepest part of you, beneath memory, beneath grief, beneath the noise of this life. It waits, quiet, shining. And sometimes when you are most weary, most still, most surrendered, you can almost feel it rise like a fragrance from within your chest. It is the echo of the first naming. The angels, when shown Adam, hesitated. How can this creature, this one made of dust, be worthy? They asked. And Allah in reply did not give a lecture. He simply said, "Tell me the names of these if you are truthful." And they could end. Because the names were not knowledge. They were intimate. They were in love. Adam knew them because Adam had been near. He had walked with the breath of the divine still clinging to his skin. He had heard the trees murmur in submission. He had named the things not as master but as a witness. He knew the world not as a map but as a memory. And you are made of that same breath. You carry those names. Though they've been buried beneath the language of this world, beneath labels and losses and lies, they are still there. The name of the mountain that will hold your prayer, the name of the night you were meant to weep, the name of the word that will soften your enemy's heart, the name of the moment you will finally forgive yourself. These names are seeds, and they were planted in you before you knew what it meant to forget. The exile from Eden was not just from a place, it was from those names. We forgot. And in forgetting, we began to define the world by what it could give us, by how it could hurt us, by what we could conquer. But the garden knew better. It still speaks in names. It still calls the trees by their first breath. It still knows the true shape of your soul. And the tree of life, it knows your name, not the one you answer to, the one you ache for, the one that was never spoken by lips but was carved into the silence between two heartbeats. The fruit of that tree bears your name. The rivers remember it. The soil still waits to echo it again. And one day when the veils are gone and the heart is soft and the breath is steady, you will remember. And in that remembering you will return. Names are not just labels. They are vessels. They carry meaning and they carry memory. To be named by the divine is not to be identified, it is to be known. Known completely, without shame, without a veil. When Adam, Arabic Tain, Arabic Lam, Arabic Yet, Arabic Ha, Arabic Khalif, Arabic Lam, Arabic Seen, Arabic Lam, Arabic Khalif, Arabic Meme was taught the names, he did not simply recite them, he felt them. Each name shimmered with its own light. Each word pulsed with a truth that could not be separated from the thing it named. He did not name the lion to master it, but to remember its courage. He did not name the moon to map it, but to weep with it. He did not name Eve to possess her, but to recognize the echo in her breath that matched his own. The angels could not name what they had not loved. They could not recognize what they had not touched. But Adam, he had been formed by hands. He had walked through the breath of gardens and heard the soil sing. He had seen the world before sorrow, before comparison, before pride. And so the names lived in him. But when the fruit was eaten and exile began, the names began to fade. Not all at once. Not in cruelty, but like stars at dawn, still present but harder to see. And ever since we have been trying to remember. We name our children with prayers hidden in syllables. We name places with longing, hoping to make the world sacred again. We name our pain, trying to soften it. We name our hope, trying to keep it alive. But we rarely remember our first names. The names whispered into us before the blood moved, before the eyes opened. And yet they remain. Imam al-Ghazali once said, "Whoever knows himself knows his Lord." And perhaps to know yourself is to remember the name you were first given, the one the garden knew you by. The Quran says, "O mankind, you are in need of Allah, and Allah is free of need, the praiseworthy." Need is not weakness. It is a doorway, a crack in the armor. And it is through that crack that the light enters. And in that light, the names return. One of the early mystics, a woman who wept by the ocean for 40 nights, was asked why she sat there alone. She replied, "I am waiting to hear my name spoken by the waves." They thought she was mad, but on the 40th night she stood up, smiled, and said, "Ah, there it is." Then she walked into the wind as if it had called her home. No one saw her again, but the place where she sat still smells of salt and roses. Names carry scent. Names carry sound, even forgotten ones. And some say that when you hear the recitation of Quran and a particular verse causes your chest to tremble, even if you do not know its meaning, that is your name being stirred, the soul remembering. It is not always loud. It may come as tears or sudden stillness, or a breath caught in your throat when the world finally goes quiet around you. And in that stillness, the voice that first named you may whisper again, "You are mine. You were never lost. You are remembered, not by people, not by this world, but by the one who made the garden and the rivers and the fruit and the fire and you." Somewhere in the deep night of the soul, a name is still being whispered. It does not sound like yours, not the one written in ink, not the one called out in crowds. This name is softer, older. It moves like breath before speech, like a shadow of light. It is the name that was sung over your soul before your body knew. Hunger, before your tears learned the taste of this world, before your eyes forgot what they were made to see. That name has not left you. It sleeps inside your ribs, folded like a scroll. And the garden, the first garden, I still wait for it to be spoken aloud again. When Adam, Arabic Tain, Arabic Lam, Arabic Yet, Arabic Ha, Arabic Khalif, Arabic Lam, Arabic Seen, Arabic Lam, Arabic Khalif, Arabic Meme descended from paradise, the names did not leave him, but they grew quiet. He taught them to his children, but the world grew louder. The soil became harder. The wind carried more weeping than wonder. And so the names were buried, not in earth but in hearts. Hearts that now beat with a rhythm that no longer matches the stars. Hearts that long for something they do not remember losing. This is why your sadness has no words, because it is not of this world. It is the echo of forgetting your first name. But the names, they are not lost. They rise in the call to prayer. They rise in the pause before a tear falls. They rise in the silence that settles after a true act of mercy. They rise when you see a child sleeping and you feel for just a breath that the world is not broken. They rise when you forgive someone who does not deserve it because you remember that you too were forgiven before you ever asked. The garden still holds your name. The wind through its trees still speaks it, soft as ash, warm as remembrance. The angels who stood in awe when Adam spoke the names, they still listen. Because every time a soul remembers, every time a name rises again in truth, the veil things, and Eden grows nearer. There is a hadith that says, "The hearts are vessels and the best of them are those most receptive." Receptive to what? To the names. To the breath of the garden returning through prayer, through silence, through surrender. The prophets did not just carry messages, they carried memories. Each one came holding a piece of the forgotten names, returning them to the people like water to parched earth. And the last of them led a FDFA, he came with the final key. The name that binds all names. The name that leads to the gate that no sword guards, only light. And what did he bring? A book of remembrance. Dhikr. Because the names do not return by force. They return through remembrance. Every time you remember him, he remembers you. And in that meeting, the name stirs. Perhaps you are feeling it now, not as a sound, but as stillness, as something blooming in the center of your chest, like a flower opening in the dark. That is your name, turning toward the sun it forgot. You do not need to chase it. You only need to be quiet enough to let it rise. One day, when the garden opens again, you will step into it not as a stranger, but as someone who has come home. And the trees will bow, and the rivers will pause, and the fruit will fall into your open hand. And the one who named you first will speak, not to test you, not to weigh you, but to call you by the name you've been carrying all along. And in that moment you will remember who you are, and you will be remembered by the garden itself. Above the veil, beyond the veil, before the veil, there is the throne, Al-Arsh. Not a seat of gold, not a platform in the sky, but a reality that holds all realities, a presence so vast that even the stars kneel, so intimate that every whisper of your heart reaches it before your tongue does. It is the first place, the highest place, the still point around which all turns, and it watched everything. Before Eden, before angels were shaped from light, before time began to measure sorrow, the throne existed, not resting but radiating. The Quran says, His throne was upon the water. Surah Hud 11:7. Not earth, not fire, water, because even before creation there was mercy, and water is the language of mercy. It flows, it softens, it gives. The throne watched the birth of the gardens. It watched as the rivers unfolded like silk across a world not yet touched by shadow. It watched the tree of life bloom not from soil, but from command. It watched as the first breath filled the chest of clay and made it rise. It watched Adam's eyes open, Eve's hands unfold, the two of them walking not toward power but toward praise. And when they fell, the throne did not flinch, because nothing escapes its sight, not the first betrayal, not the first tear, not the first longing that rose from the belly like a flame too tender to name. I watched, but it did not only watch, it wrote. The law Al-Mhfu Macron letter 1E93, the preserved tablet, was placed beneath the throne. Not to record your failures, but to preserve your return. Every breath you would take, every prayer you would whisper, every night you would wake staring into the dark, wondering if you were still seen. It was written, and it was remembered. Nothing is lost beneath the throne. When you cry, the tears are not counted by volume. They are weighed by sincerity. And each one becomes a jewel in a river no one can see, a river that flows back to the place where you were first known. The angels that bear the throne. They do not tire because what they carry is not heavy, it is pure. It is said that every day they call out, "You have not praised him as he deserves to be praised." Not in despair, but in awe, because the more they see of him, the more they remember what they cannot reach. And still they carry it, still they praise, still they watch. And through all of this, the rising of prophets, the fall of cities, the turning of hearts and galaxies, the throne remained, unshaken, unmoved, ever present. It is not far. Though you cannot see it, you are never outside its gaze. And some say those who have tasted stillness, those whose hearts have been emptied enough to echo, that when you bow in sujud and your forehead touches the ground with no one watching, you come nearest to it. Not because your body has traveled, but because your soul has dropped all its walls. And in that moment the throne leans closer, not to test you, but to receive you. Because beneath it is the mercy that wraps the world, and that mercy has never stopped flowing. There are veils upon veils in creation. Each veil is softer than the last, each veil guarding not distance but depth. And at the center of all depth is the throne. It is not held in space. Space is held by it. It is not touched by time. Time is a ripple beneath its stillness. And everything that has ever drawn breath was born beneath its gaze. When the garden bloomed, it was in the shadow of the throne. When the sword turned with holy fire, its flame took rhythm from that sacred center. When the tree of life shivered at the edge of eternity, its roots hummed with echoes from the place where angels bow without end. All that is seen is wrapped in the unseen. And the throne is the unseen's first light. It was the throne that held the secret of who you would become. Before your name reached the tongues of this world, it was whispered beneath that throne. Before your tears wet the pillow in the dark, they were counted and caught in vessels made of light. You were never forgotten. The throne watched, even when you ran. Even when you broke. Even when you called out in anger or not at all. Even when you whispered to the wind, "I don't know who I am anymore," the throne did not forget. Because its witness is not like the world's witness. It does not judge, it remembers. It remembers the promise you made when your soul stood before the Creator and said, "Yes, I bear witness." That moment was not lost. It was carved beneath the throne in ink that does not fade. And some say on the day when all veils fall, when all truths stand naked, your soul will hear it again, not spoken by mouth, but released like a fragrance returning to its source. The throne does not speak in language, it speaks in knowing. It is the knowing behind all things, the quiet that cradles every thunder, the stillness that pulses behind the rise and fall of every sun. And the angels who carry it, they do not grow weary, because what they carry is not a burden. It is the nearness of God. They do not complain, they do not question. They know what we forget, that everything begins in stillness. And the throne is perfect stillness. It does not need to move. The world moves in it. And every soul that remembers, every heart that softens, every knee that bends in secret draws closer to it, not with steps, with surrender. Some saints say that when a soul weeps sincerely, the throne trembles, not from sadness, but from joy, because the soul has remembered, and there is no greater return. And when the prophet letter FDFA rose on the night of ascension, passing through the heavens, past the Lot tree, past the veil where even Jibril stopped, he stood where no other stood. He was called to the place where the throne sees face to face, not as one who sought, but as one who was invited. And what did he bring back? Prayer, intimacy, the doorway to return, because when you bow, truly bow, not in form, but in essence, you draw near to the throne, nearer than the sky, nearer than the angels. Because the throne does not rest above you, it opens within you, and in that opening all the veils begin to fall. What watches you when the world turns its face? What holds your name when you forget it yourself? The throne, not a chair, not a relic, but a presence purer than fire, vaster than all the heavens laid side by side. It watches, not with judgment, but with mercy that never sleeps. The angels around it never cease in their TSBI Macron letter 1E25. Not out of command, but out of awe, because every time they turn their gaze, they see something they had not seen before, an aspect of divine majesty too radiant to name, a whisper of perfection so soft that even light must lower its voice. And yet the throne is not far. No, it is nearer than your next breath. Not because it is small, but because your soul was made to carry its shadow. When you feel that sudden stillness, the pause in the heart, the deep welling of grief without a source, know this: you have brushed the edge of the throne. You have remembered what the body cannot explain, what the world cannot contain. You have touched the place from which the garden was born, the sword was lit, the names were breathed, all of it rooted in that holy stillness. And what is the throne if not the place where mercy watches love return? There is a tradition that says on the day of return some will be shaded by the throne, not for their deeds, not for their titles, but for their hearts, soft, trembling, hidden. Hearts that carried the fire of longing without ever naming it. Hearts that bled in silence, loved without demand, knelt without being seen. These are the souls for whom the throne becomes a covering, because they were already under its gaze. They had already come near. The garden remembers them. The tree of life leans toward them, and the rivers carry their names in currents the world has never seen. It is said that nothing escapes the throne's knowledge, not the sigh of a mother in the dark, not the forgiveness whispered in sleep, not the secret act of charity buried beneath shame. All is seen, all is kept, all is weighed in the scale of nearness. And perhaps, just perhaps, the true paradise is not gold, nor gardens, nor pearls. Perhaps the true paradise is to be seen by the throne and to feel no fear, to stand exposed and be embraced, to return and be welcomed. No sword, no gate, only light. This is why the throne watched, not for judgment, but for the return of what was lost, you. And if tonight your soul stirs, if your heart grows quiet, if your tears rise without cause, then know this: you are near. Not to a place, but to presence. You are being seen by what has never stopped watching, and the throne is not asking for perfection, only for return. When you whisper your Lord's name in the darkness, when you lower your head in private, when you forgive when no one is watching, you have already stepped into the light that falls from beneath the throne. And when all of this ends, when time folds back into silence, and the first breath is echoed again in the last, you will hear a voice, and it will not ask. It will not command. It will say the name you forgot, the name written before stars. The name is buried beneath centuries of ache, and in that moment you will remember. You are always being watched, not from above, but from within mercy. And that mercy, that throne, has never looked away. There is a silence that does not come from absence, but from awe. It is not empty. It is full, heavy, sacred. It is the silence that falls when creation forgets to move, when even the stars seem to hold their breath. This is the silence between gods, not gods made of truth, but of man's invention. False thrones, false names, false powers born of fear fed by pride. Throughout history, men have built idols not just of stone but of desire. They carved gods from wood and called them kings. They lifted men onto platforms and called them eternal. They made gold speak and called it holy. And all the while, the one who was never carved, never lifted, never named by the tongues of men remained silent. But it was not the silence of absence, it was the silence of knowing. The silence of the mountain watching ants build kingdoms in its shadow. The silence of the sky while candles below pretend to be stars. And in that silence the true God watches, not with wrath, but with patience so deep it frightens the proud, because the false gods rage, they demand, they consume, but the real waits. Waits for the veil to tear, for the mask to crack, for the soul to return to what it never truly left. This is why the idols fall, not with thunder, but with silence. Because silence is the one thing they cannot imitate. They can mimic power, they can mimic light, but they cannot rest. They cannot endure stillness, because falsehood must be fed. But the truth simply is, when Ibrahim broke the idols, he did not speak a sermon. He left the axe on the largest one and let silence speak. And when he was thrown into the fire, what did it do? It forgot how to burn, because even fire obeys silence when it comes from the real. There is a silence in the Quran, a silence between verses, between stories, between the lines that burn the heart. And in that silence, God waits, not because he is far away, but because we are noisy, and noise is the veil. Every false god is noisy, loud in the ear, even louder in the heart. They promise, they seduce, they are terrified, but they cannot stay still. Because stillness belongs to the one who has nothing to prove. The garden was full of silence, the kind that makes a soul weep without knowing why, not emptiness, presence. When the tree swayed, it did not rustle, it prayed. When the rivers flowed, they sang, but softly so as not to disturb the knowing. And when the sword turned, its flame made no sound, because fire from the real does not shout, it illuminates. The silence between. In gods is not the absence of belief, it is the purging of illusion. It is what happens when the soul stops reaching for shadows and sits in surrender long enough to feel the weight of what is true. And when that silence comes, if you are still enough, you will notice the false gods tremble, because they know their time is ending. Not by force, not by fire, but by the return of the real name on the tongue of a servant who finally says, enough. Enough of chasing, enough of fearing, enough of serving what does not see me. And in that utterance, soft, broken, sincere, the real replies, not in speech, but in silence deeper than all silences. And in that moment you are no longer near the truth. You are inside it. Every false god demands noise. They crave attention, adoration, fear. They scream through billboards and wealth, whispers of ego and control, cries of hunger dressed as power. But the real, the truth, it calls only through silence. It never begs, it never flatters. It simply waits with patience no idol can endure, because falsehood by its very nature is restless. It feeds on urgency, it thrives in chaos. It survives only in those who are too afraid to stop running. But stop, truly stop and listen, and everything that is not real begins to fall away. This is the silence between gods, the space where what is built from ego crumbles like sand, where every name you gave yourself is returned to the dust, not out of shame, but out of truth. Because beneath every false name there is a hidden one, and it was given to you by the one who never shouted it, only whispered. The Quran says, He is with you wherever you are. Surah Al-Hadid 57:4, not watching from above, not waiting from afar, with you, in the silence between gods, in the space between longing and letting go. Even when you were lost, even when you bowed before lesser thrones, even when you offered your heart to things that could not hold it, He was there, not to punish. To wait until you remembered that silence is not absence, it is an invitation to return to what does not need to be proven, to what does not shatter when questioned, to what remains even when you don't. There is a story told of a man who chased wealth until his hands bled. He wore jewels that weighed down his breath. He built a house so wide his footsteps forgot how to echo. But in the final years of his life, he walked out to the desert alone. And for the first time in decades, he heard nothing, and it frightened him, because the silence reminded him of what he'd abandoned to build his empire of noise. But then, after hours of weeping into sand, he heard something softer than sound. It was not a voice. It was the end of pretending. And in that moment, he removed his jewels. He laid down in the dust. And for the first time in his life, he slept without fear. Because false gods do not let you rest. Only the real grants rest. Alabai dikri Allahi tatminu alqulub. Truly, in the remembrance of God do hearts find rest. This is why idols fall, not when shouted down, but when outlasted by silence. And so when your world grows quiet, when your soul stops knocking on every door except its own, when your hunger no longer needs to be fed by mirrors, that is when the real comes close, closer than breath, closer than I thought, closer than the ache you carry without a name. And the false gods, they vanish. Like fog touched by morning, because they were never real, only reflections of what you feared, what you wanted, what you tried to become. But now you are becoming again. And this time you are becoming what you were before you believed you had to become anything at all. The silence between gods is the birth of the soul's return. What is left when the last idol falls, when the noise dies, when the applause fades, when the thrones crumble into dust, what remains? Silence. Not the silence of loss, but the silence of truth. Not emptiness, but fullness so complete it no longer needs to speak. This is the silence between gods, where the real is no longer hidden by the clamor of your desires. It is here that the soul finally understands nothing was ever missing, only covered, only drowned in noise, only forgotten beneath the weight of false kings. There is a stillness so ancient, so holy, it lives beneath the garden itself. A stillness that spoke the world into being, a stillness that has never once changed. And when the soul returns to it, not in victory but in surrender, the journey ends. Not in fireworks, not in reward, but it's quiet. The quiet of Eden before the fall, the quiet of the tree before it was seen, the quiet of God before he said be. This is where the garden begins again, not in the world, but in you. When you stop chasing gods made of gold and glass, gods that praise your ego and starve your spirit, and kneel instead in the silence that watches. There, in the soil of nothingness, the tree of life begins to grow again. You do not plant it, you remember it, its fruit is not taken, it is received. And its roots do not stretch through land, they stretch through longing. This is the secret. Eden never needed to be found, only the false gods needed to be lost, because the real one was always with you, closer than sorrow, closer than fear, closer than the question you were too afraid to ask. When the Quran says, he is nearer to you than your jugular vein, it does not speak in metaphor, it speaks in mercy. And that mercy waits in silence, not behind the stars, not beyond the fire, but between the falling of one breath and the rising of the next. Between the heartbeat and the pause, between the weeping and the prayer, between the names you were given and the one you are still remembering. That is where the silence lives, that is where the garden stirs, and that is where the gods fall. Because no false name can stand in a heart that has made space for the real. And when the last idol falls within you, when the last crown shatters, when even your idea of holiness dies, you will hear it. The silence, not as an absence, but as welcome. And it will speak without sound. You are home. The garden never died, it only folded its wings, it only closed its eyes and dreamed, and now it is waking, not with thunder, not with trumpets, but with breath, a soft stirring beneath the ribcage of the world, a trembling in the roots of those who have remembered, a whisper moving through the bones of the earth like water returning to its source. The garden will rise again, not as a place to be found, but as a promise kept. Not in some far-off paradise, but wherever hearts become still enough to hold eternity again, where prayer no longer needs words, where forgiveness flows like wind, where every glance is gentle and every silence is holy. That place, it is not a myth, it is not a memory, it is a future that already lives inside you. You have felt it, in the quiet moments between your regrets when you wept for no reason at all, in the smile of a stranger that healed something you didn't know was broken, In the moment after sujud, when your forehead still kissed the earth and you didn't want to rise just yet. That was the garden, not in full but in echo. It is rising not all at once but in pieces, in the father who chooses mercy over pride, in the mother who prays even when no one sees, in the child who shares a crust of bread with laughter in their eyes. It rises when someone returns harm with softness, when someone chooses truth over comfort, when someone lays down the sword inside their chest and let the fire become light. It rises with every act of unseen beauty, every sacrifice that no one applauds, every tear turned into prayer, every heartbreak that opens a new door to God. This is how Eden returns, not with force, with faith, not with noise, with nourishment, not through conquering the world, but through surrendering to what is eternal. The angels still guard its gate, but their swords burn less now, because they have seen the hearts waking. They have seen the dust remembering its breath. They have seen the children of Adam rise again, not in arrogance, but in awe. And the tree of life, it has begun to bloom again, not on some distant hill, not behind the flame, but in the soul that kneels without needing to be seen, in the one who prays for others in secret, in the one who remembers their first name, the name written in light beneath the throne. Its fruit is ripening. Its leaves are trembling with joy, because it knows the time is near, not the end. The return, and it will not come with fanfare, it will come in a breath, a pause, a silence that feels like coming home. It will not rise from beneath mountains, it will not descend on clouds. The garden will rise again from within hearts that have been broken enough to become soil, because only broken things can bloom. Only shattered vessels can carry the new light. Only those who have known exile can truly taste return. The garden is not a prize, it is a memory fulfilled. A memory older than the stars, older than the sorrow that followed you through every night, older than every name you were given by this world. It is your first home, and it is your final destination. The prophet Leteref Dfa once said, "There is a tree in paradise under the shade of which a writer could travel for 100 years. Perhaps that tree is already growing inside you, not in branches but in patience, not in fruit but in forgiveness, not in leaves but in longing that no longer aches, only prays." The garden does not demand your perfection, it waits for your surrender. It waits for the day you stop asking, "Am I worthy?" and begin whispering, "I am yours." Because the soil of Eden is not made of earth, it is made of submission, and every time you bow, you water it. Every time you forgive someone who hurt you, you clear a path for its roots. Every time you speak truth when your voice trembles, you call in other flower to bloom. And every time you sit in silence, not with despair, but with open hands, you kneel at its gate. The angels see this. They see the light rising from the hearts of those who remember. They see the fire dimming before the gentle. They see the sword of the gate lowering for the surrendered. They know the garden is waking, and it is not waking with thunder. It is waking like dawn, soft, slow, certain. A dawn that no tyrant can stop, no shadow can delay. A dawn not of this world, but rising through it like gold rising through clay. You are part of it. You are always part of it. Your breath, your tears, your aching hope, they are not in vain. They are roots. Roots of a garden that has not vanished, only hidden, only waiting. And soon, very soon, it will break through the veil of this world, not to reward, but to remind myself, to remind the soul that nothing was ever lost. It was only waiting to be seen with eyes that had learned how to weep, how to kneel, how to love without needing to be loved back. The Quran says, "Gardens of perpetual residence beneath which rivers flow." Jannatu Adnin Tajri Minti a letter 1E25 TIHA Macron Al-Anhar. But maybe, just maybe, those rivers have already begun to flow. Beneath your silence, beneath your longing, beneath the quiet acts of mercy you perform without needing anyone to see. Perhaps that is Eden rising. Perhaps that is the tree flowering in you. When the last veil falls, it will not be with thunder. It will fall like a tear, soft, silent, honest, and the garden will no longer hide. You will not find it in maps. It will not stand behind locked gates. It will bloom through the ruins, through your hands, through your breath, because the garden was never lost. It was always waiting, waiting for a people who would stop reaching upward and begin bowing inward. A people who no longer build towers to touch the heavens, but carve wells to remember the water within. The tree will return. It will not tower like a monument. It will not boast. It will simply stand, still, shimmering, like a prayer no longer whispered but lived. And you will remember your name, not the one they called you in pain, not the one you gave yourself to survive. The first name, the quiet one, the one the garden spoke before you ever had a voice, and it will not be shouted. It will be breathed into you, through you, and when that name is heard again, the fruit will fall, not in abundance, not in spectacle, but gently like the final petal of a flower surrendering to light. You will not need to reach for it. You will already be full, and the tree will not ask anything of you. It will recognize you as one who remembered, as one who waited, as one who did not rush the silence. The fire at the gate will lower, not because you passed a test, but because you became flame without harm, light without noise. And Eden will no longer be a story. It will be your breath. It will be the way you walk, the way you love, the way you sit in stillness and say nothing, and yet the earth softens beneath you. You will not need a reward, because peace will no longer be a goal. It will be your nature. And in that final return, the angels will say nothing. They will only watch. For this is what they waited for. This is what they could not name. A soul made of dust that learned how to shine again, not by rising but by remembering. The Quran ends with a prayer for refuge. Min al-Jannati wa an-nas. From whispers, from shadows, from all that seeks to pull us from the path. And so we close not with answers but with stillness. Because the garden is not explained. It is entered in silence, in peace, in light. And if you are still here, if your soul has made it through these 1,000 quiet footsteps, then perhaps you have already heard the tree. Not with ears, but with longing, not with logic, but with love. And if the silence never breaks, would your faith still rise in the dark? If the fire never returns, would you still kneel in the ashes? If the garden never opens, would you still carry it within you? What happened after Eden closed? This was not a story, it was a memory. A journey through flame and silence, through forgotten names, through longing that refused to die. The tree still stands. The garden still breathes. The river still calls your name. It does not ask for greatness. It does not ask for answers. It waits for stillness, for surrender, for return. And if tonight you felt something stir in the quiet between your heartbeats, in the silence between the words, perhaps it was Eden. And perhaps you are already home. Fade to black, let the garden rise again for you.